I'm No Longer Here, the official Mexican submission for the upcoming Oscars. The movie has been out on Netflix since about May, but I've only heard of it recently and decided to check it out. And I have to say, it was a really good decision. At the very beginning of the film, the movie informs us that for a short while there existed a counterculture movement in Mexico that was centered around dancing to slow down Colombian music called cumbia. We then meet the protagonist of the film, a 17-year-old boy named Ulysses. He's got a weird hairstyle, a very distinct way of dressing, so we kind of know from the get go he's one of those people, he's part of that counterculture. But right away he's being ripped from it, and he goes to New York where he lives with other Mexicans, does random renovation jobs to stay afloat, and generally just tries to survive in the city, being completely and utterly alone, not knowing English. The movie then flashes back and forth between this New York timeline and the situation a few months prior with Ulysses back in Monterrey. There we learn how life for him looked like, how he was a part of a sort of a street gang, how he had all those close friends with whom he would just spend all his days, keep on dancing with not a care in the world. And also we do eventually learn about the events that happened that caused him to leave all of that behind. So at the very core, it's a drama about emigration, but I'd argue that even in a wider sense, it's about leaving. It's about leaving behind everything you know, getting cut off from family, friends, culture, habits, music, language, and even, and the way that this complete, utter disconnect impacts a person. The film has an incredible atmosphere that is built primarily through the visuals and the rather subdued acting from especially Juan Daniel Garcia Trevino, who, much like a lot of the rest of the cast, was not actually a professional actor when the film was made. A lot of the story is told without words, with us just observing what's going on, but I felt that's enough. That's more than enough. There is no exposition needed when the camera tells us everything we need to know. In this regard, I thought that the film was absolutely brilliant. Then there's the music, which in itself is almost a character in the film. As far as I recall, there is only diegetic music in the film, so we only hear what the characters themselves can hear as well. That helps further underline this striking difference between the life of Ulysses back home and in New York, because the flashbacks are filled with his music and dancing, whereas the present day scenes very often have American popular music instead, which he hates, to contrast those situations even more. I really liked the subplot with an Asian girl, a granddaughter of a shop owner who at one point hires Ulysses. And there's this thing where she gets interested in him and tries to befriend him. And I expected very standard romance plot from this, but I think it's handled in a much more adult and believable way, with the relationship between the two being extremely difficult, partly due to language barriers, but also partly due to simple cultural differences. I think the way that this dynamic is handled felt very real and believable. And finally, I want to talk about the final act, the epilogue, as it were, which further jumps into the future to show Ulysses arriving back in Monterrey. I think that was perhaps the most devastating part of the film because of the way it shows how, by not being there, he changes so much he's barely recognizable anymore. But also, even more importantly, how Monterrey itself is not the same place anymore. How Ulysses struggles to even recognize the place that he would cling on to in his memory so much that he would dream of coming back to. But as it turns out, that place doesn't really exist anymore. There's nothing to come back to. It's not only he that changes, his home has drastically changed as well. That realization, coupled with the final frames of the film, were I think the crowning achievement of the movie, it definitely gave me food for thought, and it made me feel very emotional about an experience that I personally never really had, prolonged emigration and disconnect from your culture. But it has shown those experiences so convincingly that I could relate to them. It really is a powerful movie, and I wouldn't want it to fly under the people's radar, so be sure to check it out.